Today is December 1st, 2024. This is episode 70 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Today, Joe and I will recap Week 14 for the Big Ten in football, including a couple of the rivalry games where the teams stand for the college football playoff. And then later in the week, we will preview the Big Ten championship in Indianapolis. All right, Joe, in our preview episode for this week, we did go over one of the Friday games. Minnesota did beat Wisconsin. So if you do want to hear our thoughts on that, you can go back to our previous video. But, Joe, there was another game on Friday. It was Nebraska on the road at Iowa. And the Cornhuskers looked like they were rolling, up 10-0 at halftime. But the Hawkeyes outscored the Cornhuskers 13-0 in the second half, and Iowa finishes their season 8-4, while Nebraska falls to 6-6. Joe, the story of this rivalry has been winning field goals for Iowa, and the Hawkeyes get it done and finish their regular season with 8 wins.
To be God honest, Sean, you could have inserted the script for this Iowa-Nebraska game from 2019, 2021, 2023, and now 2024. It's pretty much the same script, just with a different cast, a slightly different cast, because it always involves a middling offense, a middling quarterback for Iowa, and a pathetic offensive performance until they have a few burst plays, which in this case came through a Caleb Johnson 70-yard TD pass. That was really the only highlight Iowa had offensively. They were given multiple chances after being down 10-0 after that TD to make it 10-10. To also take the lead along with Nebraska. Both parties, I think, are equally culpable. At the end of the day, though, this is going to be the theme of the week, Sean. I thought Iowa's offense was the lesser of two evils. Sure, they definitely did not play well at all, but at the end of the day, they didn't have the critical turnover, and that's what Nebraska did. Dylan Raiola fumbled 3 times. Vincent Shavers Jr. fumbled. Although Raiola only lost it once, he lost the one at the worst time, with less than 30 seconds in the game shot, and that set up Iowa. They barely had to move any yards. And Drew Stevens, the clutchest kick of his life, to give Iowa an 8-win season. A season, again, this has kind of been the theme of Iowa's year, Sean. Up and down team, and this game was a complete up and down game. They started off about as bad as they could have. The second quarter was horrific. And then the third quarter, they kind of just hung around. And then the fourth quarter, they kind of waited for Nebraska to make that big mistake. And that's something Nebraska's continued to do. I know they got over the bull hurdle, but let's face it, Sean, this team did not win a close game this year. Blew it against Illinois. Very pathetic down the stretch against UCLA. Albeit Ohio State, they were in that game. They had a few chances to win. And as seen, there was a worse team arguably that beat them this year. The USC game couldn't find the end zone at the end. So this is still something Nebraska has struggled with this year. And I don't think that's something that's going to be a good taste in their mouth in the offseason. I think their fans are happy with the bowl game, but we can talk about big picture Nebraska more on a future episode. We will start doing those season recaps, and we'll be doing a lot more of those for football, as there's only 18 teams we have to cover. But Sean, just not good enough. And for Iowa, I think this is a nice end to the season, but there's plenty of talk to be had, and it will be starting this week at Iowa City.
And both these teams thought that they were going to have better seasons, especially from their fan base. It turns out both have a postseason game. I'm not sure who will be playing in those games for these teams, as they won't be any of the higher-ranked bowls, that's for sure. But Iowa gets to 8-4. And Nebraska falls to 6-6. But Joe, a crazy up and down season for both these teams, and this game kind of proved that even more. All right, Joe, we have 2 noon kickoff games. One was obviously way more important than the other one, so we'll go to the non-important one first. Illinois at Northwestern, technically at Wrigley Field. The Fighting Illini fall behind 10-7 after the first quarter, but they take a 14-10 lead into halftime. And they score 2 touchdowns out of the break to give themselves an 18-point lead. Northwestern brings it back to 1 possession, but then a touchdown early in the fourth quarter all but seals it. Illinois gets the job done here, 38-28, and Luke Altmaier and the Illini finish the season 9-3.
Yeah, Sean, and this wasn't one of the more impressive games for Luke Altmaier. Only 10 of 17, threw one TD, but threw two picks. And that was pretty uncharacteristic of the Luke Altmaier we saw down the stretch. I know he did have the rushing TD, but overall, Sean, not his best game. But it didn't matter because he was saved by Aiden Lockerty. Three TDs, 12 carries, 172 yards. Remarkable. And barring some crazy transfer or probably misinformed declaration to the NFL draft, Aiden Lockerty will be back next year for the Illini. So definitely some good carryover into next year. Northwestern's offense has been more of the same. They've been really good at times, whether it was the beginning of the Ohio State game, whether it was the entire Maryland game, or whether it was the first quarter of this game. But sustaining consistency throughout a game has been a struggle, and we saw that on full display with Jack Lash giving away the ball twice. Ryan Bowe, no different. I thought Cam Porter had a few nice runs, but overall he was held in check. I do want to highlight AJ Henning, probably the end of his collegiate career, or yeah, definitely the end of his collegiate career. I don't think he has any eligibility left, but 10 receptions, 119 yards, uh, and really kind of helped their offense put up 28 points when Bryce Kurtz was a non-factor. So Northwestern's offense again showed flashes this year, but overall that's not going to get it done against the team that could very likely win 10 games this year. Sean, Illinois, one of the more impressive teams in the conference. We'll do our postseason awards and distinctions a little later, but yeah, for Illinois, they made a lot of mistakes, particularly those two interceptions, but they were covered up by the fact that they're just a better football team than Northwestern, and they have more ways to beat you, especially on offense. I don't think I would have said that about Illinois at the end of September or even into October when they were slumping after that Michigan victory, but I think this has come full circle. They're a complete football team now, and I'm curious to see who they play in their bowl game because I really think they can get to 10 wins if they're matched up with the right team.
And Joe, they probably will see themselves in the college football playoff rankings, whether it's a 22, 23, something like that. That means they're probably going to be playing in one of the better bowl games. That's obviously not a playoff game. So a lot of things to look forward to for Illinois. We obviously had them finishing very low in the conference, and this was a great season for them. We'd like to get to a preview to all the bowl games for all the Big Ten teams, and obviously, hopefully, some college football playoff previews. And then you'll start seeing some of the season recaps for the teams that do not play in the postseason, and one of those is Northwestern, 4-8, unable to kind of return to their magic of last year. Like you said, though, some flashes of some good performances, but ultimately consistency wasn't quite there. All right, Joe, the other noon game was the biggest game of the weekend, and not for a good reason. Your Michigan Wolverines go into Columbus with absolutely nothing to play for other than to ruin their rival's season, and that's exactly what they did. Michigan 13, Ohio State 10, takes Ohio State out of the Big Ten championship game, and while they still likely will hear their name called in the college football playoff, Ryan Day loses to Michigan again at home with this talent gap. Obviously, a lot of things to talk about here, but where do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm glad. Hopefully, most of our listeners are on Spotify, but if you do see the YouTube live, I sneezed three times there because that's probably how an Ohio State fan feels after watching that debacle. And me and Sean talked off camera kind of about the game, and I'm going to be real honest with you. I used the lesser of two evils phrase in the Nebraska-Iowa game. I think this game is what gave me the idea. I want to be very clear here. Michigan's offense did not do anything in this game that they hadn't done all year. That was struggle to even be a fragment of a two-dimensional offense. It was extremely clear they only had a chance to win this game if they ran the ball. And I'm going to be completely honest. Aside from a few runs, obviously that Kalel Mullings run at the end and a few gadget plays, particularly the Alex Orji, which shouldn't even be considered a gadget play if you watch Michigan all year. I mean, when Alex Orji enters a game, they bring a receiver around in motion, or they bring a running back with him. He doesn't even fake the handoff. He just goes. I mean, come on. If you've watched Michigan all year, it was blatantly obvious what they were going to do. And Ohio State did not seem prepared for it at all. I thought it was a complete failure to prepare and a complete failure of a game plan by Ohio State, more so than it was Michigan winning. Because the one place Michigan is elite, and I'm not going to try to go on an unorganized tangent here, offensively, And I mean, defensively for Ohio State, you can't be that upset. They got 2 turnovers. They saved the offense a lot for putting it in bad field position. Michigan only got a field goal out of when Ohio State failed to flip the field and gave Michigan the ball at Ohio State's 40. The touchdown, I can't really see how you could blame. I mean, Michigan's first 10 points was gotten in 6 plays and gained a total of 5 yards. And one of those was because the ball was at the 2 yard line. I mean, you can't really expect the defense to be all world and do that. And they were all world when Captain Jack Sawyer got that interception on the 1 yard line. And that pretty much proves how incompetent Michigan's offensive play calling has been and was certainly yesterday against the Buckeyes. But offensively, Sean, this all falls onto Ryan Day, to be completely honest with you. I don't like getting into the psyche of people. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I didn't go to school for that. But it's pretty evident to me and a lot of pundits around the country that Jim Harbaugh, that third base comment from 3 years ago, is still in his head. Ohio State has one of the best aerial attacks and that's been the trademark of their program since Ryan Day got there as an offensive coordinator in 2017. And they completely went away from it. The one drive they did it, they scored a TD and marched right down the field. I mean, it was remarkable. They averaged 3 yards a carry, and they had two good runs the entire day. And after Will Howard had his bell rung in the first quarter by Makari Page, in the second quarter, rather, they didn't even attempt a QB run. It just made no sense. This offense could beat you in so many different ways. And they just tried to do it the one way. They attacked Michigan in the one spot where they're absolutely elite at, as they'll have two top 10 picks in the interior D line, and maybe a third of Josiah Stewart on the edge. He'll at least be a day 2 pick. And they just went at them time and time again. They didn't attack the inexperienced secondary. They didn't attack a secondary without Will Johnson. And they allowed an offense with a back-level quarterback. I like Davis Ward, but let's call it what it is. He threw for 62 yards and 2 picks. No Colston Loveland. No Donovan Edwards for most of the game. They allowed that offense to outscore them. And they allowed Kirk Campbell, who's likely going to be looking for a job on LinkedIn tomorrow, uh, to win in the horseshoe. That is almost unbelievable. The after the game stuff, I'm not really into the sports radio. Who started it? Rah rah, flag plant. I really don't care. You can assess that on your own. I think most of our viewership is educated enough on that. But Sean, that kind of shows how in Ohio State's head, this defies logic. It's a
Yeah.
23.5 point underdog to start the week, and Vegas knows what they're talking about. Completely unbelievable and unacceptable for Ohio State, and we're gonna see how big the consequences are. But right now, we woke up. It was December 1st, 2024. It might have been January 6th, 2021 in Columbus when you woke up there today.
And Joe, there's a couple things we should go over from this game. First off, we both expected Michigan to give their best performance of the year, so it's not surprising that this game was close. But the manner that Michigan won was, for me, Ohio State continued their streak of slow starts. They have given up the first touchdown in every game going back to all except the Purdue game. They've given up the first touchdown. And their defense actually saved them a couple times. There's that 4th and 1 from the 2 that they didn't get. The Sawyer interception, that was certainly a touchdown if he just puts a little more air under that. And Michigan made mistakes too. And when Warren threw that interception, I really thought Ohio State was going to go on and win it. But no, they didn't. Will Howard obviously missing a number of key throws. The running backs did nothing, just 77 yards rushing on 26 carries. For me, Joe, the slow start wasn't surprising because we've seen it before. And then once Michigan grew into the game a little bit, Davis Warren did actually make a couple really nice throws on 3rd down. And I thought the crowd really, really played into it. They got nervous. It was easy to tell through the TV. And you just thought, all right, when is Ohio State going to take control of this game? It never happened. The only possession that they looked good was the one that you mentioned, Joe, when they had a 2-minute drill, when they had to go, and they had to throw it, and they did not worry about anything else. That's when they looked the best. That's what proves to me that it was all mental. Now, for the Buckeyes, they still have a chance to win the national championship, and they're the betting favorites at the beginning of the day yesterday. And, Joe, at this point, you have to say that that's the only thing that will remove the stench of this game. Because if they don't win the national championship, Michigan still has 4 wins in a row against their rival and a more recent natty. So I think Wank deserves a ton of credit for Michigan, but I'm giving 95% of the blame to Ryan Day and Ohio State here. There's no reason that this game should have been within 20 points on your own field with a chance to go to the Big Ten championship. Absolutely no way.
Yeah, Sean, it was. I literally told people this is the Michigan fan of me speaking, not the podcast commentator that you've hired me to be. Uh, I was more. I think I'm more happy that Ohio State fans are angry than I am about Michigan being happy, to be completely honest with you, because the last 3 years, it's explainable. The last three Michigan teams to beat them, 21 through 23, all won the Big Ten. They all made the college football playoff. One won a national title. This one was not a good football team. I'll be very clear. They lost to a 6-6 Washington team. They were dominated by Illinois, albeit a team that might win 10 games. They slept a walk against Indiana and almost somehow could have won that game, but they weren't even that close. Don't let the final score tell you that. And they were steamrolled by both Oregon in the second half and Texas the entire game.
At home, too.
Yeah,
at home.
Yeah. And I definitely think Ohio State at its best is probably the second or perhaps the most potent team in the country. I just don't see how recovering from this is easy. I think it's definitely possible. I remember 2 years ago when they lost that game to us in the horseshoe, and then they really should have beaten Georgia and would have steamrolled TCU and won the Natty. But this time, it's going to cost them a lot more. They might have to go on the road. I doubt it.
I don't think so.
They might. I doubt it, but they definitely have to win 4 games to win the Natty now. That bye is completely out of the question.
Yeah, and we talked about the crowd being, and the Indiana game the week before being such a high-energy game. And then as soon as that game ended, they said, this doesn't matter. We're all focused on next week. Ryan Day said goal number 1 of the season before even winning a Big Ten or winning a national championship was to beat Michigan. Now, not beating Michigan takes the second one out of play. Now, the third one is still in play, but you could tell how much this game meant to those Ohio State players, those Ohio State seniors who have never beaten Michigan. And, Joe, regardless of whether they get a national championship, they will go without beating their rivals. So they jump out of the Big Ten championship game. They'll still likely host a home game, which, might be good to get in front of your own fans and give them some confidence again. But the team that will be taking their place in the Big Ten championship, Joe, as we started just before that one ended, we talked about it maybe playing into the fans at that stadium's psyche, that the other game was close, and it certainly did. Penn State takes down Maryland 44-7, and they do give up a touchdown on the first play of the game, but after that they blank the Terrapins. Nittany Lions get a golden opportunity via Michigan, and they take advantage of it and cruise to a Big Ten championship game appearance and a college football playoff appearance. So, Joe, Penn State takes care of business. Anything to add here?
No, not really. I just want to highlight a few guys. Aller and Warren, I mean, I highlight them every week. Nick Singleton got it going on the ground again. I thought that was encouraging for Penn State to see. They did give Allen 13 carries. Not really a great game from him, but I bet that was to get him going the effect that would have had. The post-game melee in this between Loxley and Franklin was so pathetic in comparison to the other stuff, not only the Michigan-Ohio State game, but if you want to see a brawl, don't watch that. That's a waste of time. Watch the Michigan-Ohio State brawl, watch the Florida State brawl, or the attempted brawl in Texas A&M. That was just a bunch of nonsense. That's just a waste of a video click. But overall, Sean, Penn State, business-like performance. I don't think they even put anything different on film to beat a lowly Maryland team. I thought they could have gotten a few more receivers going, but I understand wanting to kind of just wrap this up and get to next week, which I think they'll have a majority of fans in Indianapolis, to be honest.
Well, Joe, I don't think they really emptied the tank here, which they probably were thinking they could have had Ohio State won. You want to get all your starters in there for a lot, but everybody was used. Prabula was used at quarterback some. Tyler Warren was used at quarterback some. They definitely mixed it around, and obviously Singleton just keeping him at 13 carries. And you're able to – this one was over pretty quickly. But, Joe, Penn State likely will be hosting a playoff game also. And a lot of people around the country aren't really giving them the respect that I think they deserve. And it's pretty likely that I think they win that first round game if it's at home in State College. All right, up next, Joe, on CBS, it was Notre Dame going on their first true road game since Week 3 to play Jaden Maeva and the USC Trojans. And the Trojans hung tough early. This game was tied at 14 at halftime, but the Trojans' defense could not stop the Irish offense, and Notre Dame cruises to a 49-35 victory. Got out of hand late there with back-to-back pick sixes, but USC's offense hangs with a pretty good defense for a while, but ultimately comes up short. Notre Dame, a really good football team. USC ends the season at 6-6.
Yeah, Sean, the real shame of this game for USC is you kind of saw on display what they could have been. I thought Quentin Joyner, Brian Jackson, even with Woody Marks, even though he had kind of a lackluster game, you saw how many weapons they truly had, whether it was Mekhi Lemon on the outside, Deuce Robinson, obviously Kyron Hudson, he didn't do much, but they have so many weapons. Kyle Ford, Zachariah Branch, Jacoby Lane. This team should not have got 6-6. And there's even Lake McCree, who I didn't mention, who had only 2 yards on 1 reception. This team had an embarrassment of riches, and the fact they scored 35 might bode well for the future should they keep all these guys, but kind of shows what they missed out on this year. I do want to talk about Notre Dame, even though they're not a true Big Ten team. I completely underestimated Riley Leonard, admittedly. I thought he was a solid quarterback. I know for a fact Michigan wanted him. Should JJ have not dragged his feet in December or not won the Natty, that definitely affected timing. I have no doubt Riley Leonard would have been quarterbacking at Michigan, and you see why teams want him in the portal. Mobile on the run, willing to run, and also willing to be a game manager in a way, too. I thought that was Notre Dame's best chance to win this game, and they did. Tyler Buckner even got in a pass, the current lacrosse player and former disgraced Notre Dame quarterback, so definitely happy for him.
Former Alabama Crimson Tide quarterback, too.
Yeah, that too. Unbelievable. Mitchell Evans. And by the way, Tyler Buckner, that's got to be one of the most interesting stories. Played on Alabama, wanted to transfer before the bowl game, was in uniform at the Rose Bowl, won a natty for Notre Dame lacrosse, and now trying to win another natty for Notre Dame football. So definitely something to keep an eye on for some Instagram posts. But Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Lowe, I mean, what more can you say? Mitch Evans, I think, is a top 5 tight end in college football, and the defense made plays when they had to. Don't think scoring 30, giving up 35 is a great recipe for the college football playoff because you're going to be playing better offenses, but got the job done. And Notre Dame, after that disastrous loss to Northern Illinois, punches its ticket to their first 12-team college football playoff. So good on the Irish. USC definitely showed some flashes, but ultimately Notre Dame had too many answers on offense for that defense. And USC's, again, going to enter, they're going to make a bowl game, but their 2025 started today, and it definitely is not starting well. They just lost a 5-star receiver commit to probably Texas A&M, Jerome Miles. Not official yet. A few schools try to go after him, but USC is going to have to work hard to keep guys in the class, get more guys in, and then hit the portal like they never have before.
Yeah, and like you said, Joe, Notre Dame's not a Big Ten team, but they very much could fit in this conference play style-wise, location-wise, all that. But USC lost this game because they just lost the battle in the trenches. Jeremiah Love was running over them, and he left the game with an injury. So then Jadarian Price comes in, does the same thing. Like, they need to get a little better at the Big Ten side of football, and they lost this game because they just couldn't stop a rather simple offense from Notre Dame. Now, I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean that as, here's what we're going to do. You're not going to stop it. Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're not going to stop it. So Notre Dame, it ends up being a 2-score win. A lot of possessions in this one. Didn't really expect this one to be the shootout that it was. But USC falls, and we'll see where they're headed. And Notre Dame is likely headed to hosting a first-round game in the college football playoff. All right, Joe, up next, one of the more shocking results of the weekend. It's Rutgers. They go on the road and take it to Michigan State. The Scarlet Knights win 41-14. Kyle Monungai with a big game. Kelly McManus does his thing. And Joe, Rutgers goes in there and wins by a lot. I think we both saw Rutgers potentially winning this game, but the fact that this wasn't competitive was certainly shocking to me.
Yeah, Sean, especially the way it started. Aiden Childs marched Michigan State right down the field, went up 7-0 in a snowstorm. I thought that could have been wraps, especially because I picked Michigan State to win. I fully expected them to go all out and have their best performance of the year because they were playing for their lives. But that was the complete opposite. Kyle Monuggai, Athan Kaliakmanis took it to him. Special teams debacle for Michigan State also contributed to that little mess, and from there, Sean, kind of the offensive play calling with Brian Lindgren was as uncreative as it's been all year, to be completely real. And I really believe that Rutgers could have been probably a 9, maybe even a 10-win team. And this is the version we wanted, capitalizing off other teams' mistakes, uh, running Kyle Monuggai. Antoine Raymond also had a great game. And passing wise, they didn't even have to pass all that much. Athan Kaliakmanis, 13 to 22, 157 yards, pretty average QBR. And that's all it took. They just kind of let Michigan State make their own grave, and Michigan State didn't even turn over the ball, Sean. This complete ineptness. I thought the game was pretty much over when Michigan State was down 10-7, and they went for it at the Rutgers within the red zone, 4th and 1, and they did a delayed halfback draw play. Michigan State has run, whether it was the Mel Tucker era or the John Smith era, the very beginning of it. So many times on 4th down and gotten stuffed by a multitude of teams. I cannot believe they went back to that. Just completely shocking. And then Rutgers from there just picked up the pieces, led 23-7 at half. It could have been worse. And then from there, you could tell Michigan State's fans didn't want to be there. Michigan State themselves didn't want to be there. And I mean, that kind of tips off how a lot of Michigan State losses have been. Very good at the beginning, whether it was Ohio State, Oregon, even Michigan, and a complete collapse at the end of the game. And Rutgers 7-5, they have the chance to get to 8 wins for the first time in a decade, their first year in the Big Ten. So definitely a lot to play for there. And Michigan State, again, we're going to do a season. I think their season overview is going to be really interesting, especially depending on who enters the portal from them from here, because I do think they have a lot of potential for next year, but they do have to work to retain some pieces.
Yeah, Joe, this was just a total disaster from them. They just really didn't get any of their playmakers the ball. Kayron Lynch Adams with only 9 carries, Nick Marsh with 1 carry and 2 catches, and it just, the game script got thrown out immediately. It was pretty clear that whatever they prepared for, they changed, and then that didn't work either. So Michigan State in year one of Jonathan Smith does not go to the postseason. All right, up next, Joe, we have another first-year coach, and that's UCLA. They knock off Fresno State to finish 5-7. And all things considered, Joe, you have to think that where they were in the beginning of the year to now is a pretty steady trajectory on the up. Fresno State, a decent team from the Mountain West, and Ethan Garbers gets his team from down 10-6 at halftime to a 7-point victory. UCLA wins 20-13.
Yeah, Sean, overall, admittedly, no one watched this game. I'll tell you that on BTN. After the day of college football we had, 4-2 after starting 1-5, I think UCLA fans would have taken that deal, especially that, uh, you know, two of those four were on the road as heavy underdogs, whether it was at Rutgers or whether it was at Nebraska. And then I think beating Iowa at home kind of was the pinnacle of that 4 game stretch, to be completely honest with you. They beat a lot of traditional Big Ten teams, something USC did not do. USC, I believe, failed to win on the road, unless you want to count the Las Vegas game against LSU or the Rose Bowl, which is not really all that far from USC for those of you who know the Los Angeles area. So I thought a pretty good year, especially when you consider the context of Deshaun Foster's first year. I mean, he got the job in practically February, which is the time around definitely 2 months after the early signing day and the day of the actual signing day. So, which does not hold the same merit it used 2 years ago. So, UCLA, I think they do have to do some work in the portal. I think as a program, especially the football program, they have a lot of work to do on the NIL front. So I think he's definitely behind the 8 ball still, but it's a lot better than having a winless conference season. Something we thought they definitely could have had after that. Uh, let's call it what it is, Sean. Pretty humiliating start. Getting 40 bombed by Indiana, getting dominated by LSU and Oregon, But I did think the Penn State Minnesota game showed some light for them, and then from there, their season recap video is going to be really bad at the beginning, but toward the end, I do think we're going to have a lot of things to discuss. And in these recap videos, we will do like future overview of the program as well. So we're not just going to be like if you're a Purdue fan, for example, which we'll get into, you're not going to just hear like doom and gloom. You might hear some hope, but maybe not too much either.
Yeah, expect those to come out certainly after conference championship weekend and college football playoff announcements. Um, and and then we'll get the ones that we can done, and then as the seasons end, we'll hit those. But Joe, all right, up next was the Old Oak and Bucket game in a snowy Bloomington, Indiana, and Indiana bounces back from back-to-back poor performances with a margin that's never been seen before since 1892 in this rivalry. The Hoosiers win 66 to nothing. Curtis Rourke throws for a career high 6 touchdown passes, and Kurt Signetti and the Hoosiers send a message to the College Football Playoff Committee that they need to be included. This one was ugly early, it was ugly in the middle, and it was ugly late. And there's something that happened after the game that we'll talk about later. But Joe, Indiana got their confidence back.
Yeah, I did not. I mean, I forecasted a 40-point blowout. A 66.1 is not something I would have guessed. Yeah, this is typical Kirk Signetti. I don't mean that in a bad way. Covering the spread for all those bettors out there, and just completely playing with the opponent at the end too by putting up 60. So Indiana, this solidified their fate to be in the college football playoff. I highly doubt they host, even with Ohio State losing and Miami losing. I think it's going to take a whole heck of a lot of weird things next week to happen, and I don't really see that on the table. We could talk about that in our preview episode. But Sean, to be completely honest with you, Purdue kind of showed why they're the worst team in the conference. They played one of the better teams in the conference, definitely not the best team, but one of the better teams, and they showed just how far as a program they were from these teams. And I think that probably played a mini factor into Ryan Walters getting fired. I do think if you look at the totality of the year, even the first half against Michigan State, that's a game that was there for the taking. And I do want to give Purdue players some credit. They definitely fought in the Michigan State game, but this game, they clearly quit after the second quarter. And this is a program whose better players are going to be for the pickings for the portal. And I think Purdue's got to act fast to hire a head football coach because they definitely hit on Jeff Brom, but hiring football coaches has not been their specialty. Whether it was Daryl Hazel, even even getting Ryan Walters, this was just not a great era. Especially, it started out hopeful last year, 4-8, but they were recruiting well. Once recruiting started to falter, that's a great indication of a guy not lasting long. And Purdue's not a harsh place. They are generally pretty happy with like 5-6 win seasons. So let's call it what it is. It's a blatant basketball school. They get fired after 2 years is not a good omen.
It was a season that went down the drain pretty quick for Purdue, and like you said, Joe, this wasn't the only game where they really quit early. And in terms of Indiana, like they fumbled 3 times in their own territory, and that's how Indiana kept running up the score. I mean, if you don't want to do that, then don't give them the other team the ball. And the Hoosiers did leave their starters in probably a little longer than they usually would have, with a 3 to 4 week layoff upcoming until their next game. But still, this game was over quick, and it was good to see Indiana sort of take down some of these lower teams pretty handily, like we saw earlier in the year. All right, Joe, the last game of the day was the Pac-12 championship game from a year ago, and Dan Lanning gets over the Washington hump. After losing twice last year, the Oregon Ducks improved to 12-0 with a 49-21 win over Washington. This one, Oregon never trailed. They were up 28-14 at halftime. Dylan Gabriel throws for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. And Oregon, with a loss here anyway, Joe, was heading to Indianapolis, but they're the only team that goes through the regular season undefeated. So, Joe, Oregon business-like performance here, and all eyes for them are on next week.
Yeah, Sean, it's hard to say how this right now isn't one of the greatest seasons in Oregon history, at least modern Oregon history. That's a program that's had a lot of success recently, whether it was them going to the Rose Bowl pretty regularly, whether that was them qualifying for the first ever college football playoff, and being in the BCS National Championship in 2010 against the Cam Newton Auburn team. This is a program that's over the last 20 years seen a lot of success, but I think this year was one of the best, and that's because they took care of everything. They beat a great Ohio State team at home. They went into the Big House and dominated. They dominated uh, their old Pac-12 foes, and they dominated their one Pac-12 foe that gave them the most problems in the first 2 years of Dan Lanning. Washington beat Oregon 2 years ago in Eugene, really ended their season there. Beat them last year twice, and really took an Oregon team I thought that was deserving of a college football playoff spot. But they ran to the wrong Washington team twice. And although this cast was different for Washington, I think Devon Williams Jr. did play a great game. And as only a freshman, I think the future is really bright for them, and especially under Jed Fish, he will be a great player in this conference, maybe even next year. But Oregon, too much to handle. Dylan Gabriel, efficient performance. Jordan James, a typical performance. And the Noah Whittington. That 1-2 punch is really becoming an issue that teams in the playoff are not going to want to see. And them spreading the ball out between Holden, Ferguson, even Tez Johnson. This is a receiving core that had very little work to do last night. They kind of just ran the ball, something Washington's defense struggled with the entire year. And this game was 28-14 at halftime, but anyone who watched it kind of knew Washington had no chance after that. And this caps off a remarkable regular season for Oregon. We're going to talk about their matchup with Penn State because I do think it's pretty interesting, especially the fact these teams haven't seen each other at all recently, which is, makes it all the more interesting to me. And Washington, I think 6-6. I think they had some signature wins. I thought the win against USC was good. I thought the win against UCLA and especially the win against Michigan, definitely the highlights of the year. Some missed opportunities, whether that was the game against Wazoo, Rutgers, and certainly some missteps like the whiteout and the blowout at Iowa. But overall, Sean, I think the fact they get these extra bowl practices with Devon Williams Jr. and the fact that they kind of established an identity. Jonah Coleman will likely be back next year. I mean, God, if he hits the portal, I would love Michigan to get him. But definitely a guy I think Washington's going to hold on to since he followed Jed from Arizona. So uh, not a bad first year for Washington. I think this is more of an educational year, and the fact they get extra practices into 2025 is a really good thing. But right now, it's all about the Oregon Ducks. They're the premier team in the conference, the team of the year in the conference, even if they do lose to Penn State, because they, after the little uncertainty, one bad game at Wisconsin, they were phenomenal the rest of the year.
Yep, and they will likely be the number one overall seed by taking care of business in Indianapolis, and we will talk about that later this week, Joe. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to our Week 14 recap here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. Be sure to look out for that Big Ten Championship preview, and then the other bowl games, which include Big Tens. We'll be previewing, recapping those, and then we'll be recapping all the seasons when they come to an end. We've got basketball power rankings coming up soon, and a bunch of MTE previews and recaps also on the channel. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in.